Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We have quite the attendance today, about 120, close to 120 attendees. So really excited about this. We have our webinar on service design today. So we have, yeah, awesome. So I think before I go into the details, for those of you who do not know, I'll just explain how the tool is laid out. So I hope you can see me, the video in between. Right below me, you can see the slides or the keynote deck that's coming up. Right on your right-hand side of the screen, you'll see there's a chat column, which I think right now about 15 or so people have already figured it out. So feel free to use the chat box to, of course, say hi, which many of you are already doing that. But also during the course of the webinar, feel free to use the chat forum to put forward your questions or comments or anything you want to share. But if you are asking a question, it would really help us and the moderators that are trying to filter the chat for questions. If you can just start by, just write the word question and then, type out whatever question you have. So towards the end of the webinar, we have about 15 to 20 minutes scheduled just for Q&A. So we'll try and squeeze as many of the questions possible. Yeah, so sounds great. So I'm going to get started. We are really excited today to have Stephanie Rosinski, who's the lead service designer at Bridgeable, and Elsa Wong, who's also part of the service design team at Bridgeable, who've joined us for the webinar and who will be sharing what exactly is service design. So I know there has been a lot of interest in the community. I've always wondered, between the different facets of user experience design, where does service design play in? And it's not going to be just talking about, the content part of what service design is, but Stephanie and Elsa will also be sharing with us a couple of frameworks and tools that they use on a day-to-day basis at their work at Bridgeable. So really excited about that part. So before we dive into the content of the webinar and welcome Stephanie and Elsa, I would like to give a huge shout out to our sponsors. So our annual gold patron, TELUS Digital, and our annual silver patrons, Boost Agents, Connected Lab, and TWG for their support for the design community in Toronto. So I won't be talking much for this part of the webinar, so we will be diving into the service design part and the content part. Also, a big shout out to everyone at Bridgeable, that has worked with us in helping make this webinar a reality. So I'll be handing over the presentation to Stephanie and Elsa, and we can, I don't think I can hear your applause, even though you guys would be applauding at your desks. So feel free to use the chat, and let's welcome Stephanie and Elsa.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's great to be here with everyone.
Awesome. Really great to have you guys here, and really excited. 136 attendees, plus myself, are really excited about learning all about service design today.
Perfect. Great. So thank you everyone who showed up for the webinar, and thank you to Preet, who's invited us to be here. The DesignX community is really interesting, and so we're really excited to be able to contribute. Yeah. So my name is Stephanie, and I will be co-presenting today with my colleague Elsa, who's doing some of the tech right now. And so we are both service designers at Bridgeable, which is a design consultancy located in Toronto. And we'll share a little bit briefly about our backgrounds before we dive into the presentation and make that full screen. So a bit about myself. I am a lead service designer at Bridgeable. I joined the company a couple of years ago, initially on a healthcare team. And lately I've been working more so on internal projects where I'm focused on leveling up our capabilities, which essentially means codifying some of the tools, methods, and ways of doing things that are unique to us and spreading that across the company. And then in terms of my background as a designer more broadly, I studied industrial design here in Toronto, and then have been working predominantly in the healthcare space. I worked at an innovation center at UHN and then moved to a healthcare startup before joining Bridgeable. So got a bit of a background in industrial design, UX, user experience, service design, and a bit of design research. And I'll hand it over to Elsa.
Cool. Hello, my name is Elsa, and I have a background in visual design and also in user experience design. So before being at Bridgeable, I was at IBM for about a year working on learning platforms and anything around like internal training content to help build IBMers' internal capabilities and their skills. Now here at Bridgeable, I'm working on a project with a client to help families manage their everyday healthcare and medications a little bit better. So that's our short little and quick introduction. We're going to turn off the video for now so that we can make our presentation full screen, but you will be seeing our faces again at the end when we do a Q&A.
Perfect. So we're just going to transition now. We should be in full screen mode. So again, thank you all for joining us. We've organized the agenda today along some key questions that you might have about service design. So first, we're going to cover why service design. Why has this form of design surfaced and become so popular in recent years? Next, we'll cover what is service design anyway, where we'll speak about the practice and tools used by service designers. Third, we'll touch on some of the overlaps and differences between service design and UX. And lastly, we'll review a Bridgeable case study to tie it all together and show you how we use service design to solve client problems before opening it up to you, the audience, for some questions. So kicking off, why service design? Why has this field of design emerged today? The answer to why service design is multifaceted, but the underlying reason is because the nature of business has fundamentally changed. This graph shows the average company lifespan on the American stock market from 1960 up to around 2012 with some projections out. So you can see that the overall trend is a pretty drastic decline. Companies generally don't last as long as they used to. To stay alive in today's economy requires a fundamentally different way of approaching business, even than 10 years ago. Why is business so complex now? There's a few key forces of change that we'll dive into. There's technological disruption, customer preference change, competitor innovation, and regulatory change. First, we'll take a look at technological disruptions. Today, you have the option to shop around town or around the world. Technology-enabled products and services means you can interact with a business across multiple channels, from in-store, online, through an app, pop-up shops, etc. Social media allows people to post reviews, post complaints, and to speak freely about your business in places and spaces that your business might not even know about. So we've come as consumers to trust and rely on this information being supplied by other customers, for example, reviewing a restaurant on Yelp before we decide to walk in the door. AI-enabled platforms supply us with both massive aggregates of data that previously did not exist. For example, within minutes, I can use cheapo flights to check the cost of flights from multiple airlines, and I can use it for free without a travel agent. AI also enables personalization. Everything you've ever typed into Google is stored forever, and your past queries will inform what it shows you in the future. The next force of change that we'll look at is customer behavior change. Here, looking at Bose headphones on Amazon, it's recommending to me lower priced items, it's recommending every color I could imagine, and there's loads of product reviews. There are not just more options to choose from, but there's an explosion of niche products and services available. Chris Anderson describes this in his model of the long tail, which talks about how our new era of commerce is able to link people to the weirdest, most niche items you could possibly imagine. This expansion of the market means we can have increasingly widened varieties of products and services available, whether that's hiring a cuddle buddy to ordering some nitrogen-made ice cream. Cross-sector comparisons means that customers take experiences from one vertical, like going to a hotel, and they directly relate the experience to another vertical, like going to a hospital. People tend to expect an incredibly high degree of customer service from all of their services, which is extending our expectations of institutions like government, healthcare, transportation, and education. These older institutions are having trouble keeping up. Next, there's the focus on experience. People are investing in experiences and access over ownership. That's why many of us are satisfied to have access to a car anytime via car sharing or ride sharing services rather than buy a car. This turning point of turning products into services is part of what's disintegrating the automotive industry. It's not just that manufacturing went overseas, but it's also that millennials don't see buying a car or even learning to drive as that staple coming of age step towards adulthood, the same way that past generations have. Third, we'll talk about competitive innovation. Competitive innovation means companies have increasing competition from small companies and startups. We live in an era of continual disruption by technologies and new business models, which are cleaving off profit from larger established organizations. 10 years ago, if you said that taxis, the automotive industry, and public transit would be hit with fierce competition from the sharing economy, which would cleave off profit by employing regular citizens to fulfill all of those roles, it actually would have sounded really unreasonable. This fierce level of competition is forcing traditional companies to take more risks and find new ways to differentiate. The last force of change we'll discuss is regulatory change. This image represents regulations around MERs, which stands for Management Expense Ratio. This regulatory change meant that banks would have to be more transparent about the cost of managing your investments. Banks knew that once customers could finally see how much they were charging for managing their investments, that there would be a lot of pushback. That's part of what disruptive companies like Wealthsimple are able to tout up front. There's both the transparency of cost and lower costs overall. There's also an increasing emphasis for companies to serve the public good, with acts like the AODA, which stands for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which legislates that businesses must provide accessible services and places of work for diverse people. So as you can see with these four forces of change, the nature of business has changed drastically in the last 10 to 20 years, and it will only continue to change. From a customer's perspective, how do we think about how experiences have changed? Everything today is more connected and more complex. New consumer expectations are constantly raising the bar and blending our expectations between sectors. If we look at the traditional process of buying music, it used to be super linear. I would find out about an album, purchase a CD in a physical store, and then listen at home on my CD player. If I wanted to listen to an album elsewhere, I would have to carry that CD around to play it in my Discman or in my car. Today looks nothing like that. All of my music is in the cloud, which I can access anywhere, anytime. I pay next to nothing for access to thousands of artists, and I don't ever have to leave my couch to go buy an album. 80% of large organizations believe they deliver a superior experience, but only 8% of their users agree. This stat was researched by the global management consulting firm Bain & Company. So what happened here? Why are companies' self-perceptions so flawed? What we see is that organizations often focus on delivering the functional aspects of their products and services without stepping back to actively design the totality of the experience. Organizations tend to be structured and measured based on functional silo to believe that they have a view of the customer. The problem is the view from any one silo looks relatively simple. They may think that the user moves linearly through their service because the actual experience of moving between these silos is hidden from any one silo's view. There's a great saying that no one understands the complexity of your organization like your customers. That's because from a customer perspective, things will look a lot more like this graph. They're jumping around between channels and touch points, and it's not as linear as an organization might think. Just to clarify, a channel simply means the medium or the mode in which something is being delivered to a customer. So this might be an app, it might be a storefront, a website. These are all examples of channels, which tend to be kind of static mediums. A touch point, on the other hand, is actually the moment in time when a customer interacts with your product or service. So examples of this is the moment when I unbox my iPhone. It's when I'm waiting at a TTC stop, or it's when I'm using signage at the airport to find my gate. If today's typical customer engagement model is actually multi-channeled, nonlinear, and happens over time, then the way that we craft strategies and tactics to create a compelling user experience has to take into account all of this complexity. Taking what we've just established about the changing nature of business and the changing nature of customer behaviors and expectations, here are some of the problems that we use service design to tackle here at Bridgeable. We've worked with RBC to redesign the experience of opening a bank account. We've worked with the TTC to understand their users more deeply and develop their 5-year strategic plan. We've worked with TELUS on their experience of renewing cell phone contracts. And we've worked with BMS, a leading American pharmaceutical company, to improve the patient experience of receiving cancer treatment. So next, I'm going to hand the mic over to Elsa.
Great, thank you, Steph. So we've just talked a lot about how the world is changing and how organizations need to take a step back to view their service. But what exactly is service design? So service design is a discipline for understanding and orchestrating all of the factors needed to deliver win-win interactions between a service provider and their customers, ensuring that the service is usable, desirable, and creates value across all channels. So what does this look like? Let's think about going on vacation for a moment, because it's a nice thought, but also it's a really great example of a complex service experience. So when somebody decides that they need to take a beach vacation, they'll probably go through some sort of research process before purchasing a ticket. Before taking off, they'll receive confirmation, likely via email, that they actually have a seat on the flight and a room to stay in at a hotel. They'll travel to the airport, go through security, board the plane, and interact with the hosts of the airline. And upon landing safely, they might be chauffeured to their resort where a staff member will greet them by their name. So there is a lot going on here, both for the customer and the multiple service providers. For the customer, they're dealing with a number of different service providers in a single experience. So think about Expedia, WestJet, the airport staff, and the resort hotel. And how many channels could they have done that through? Online, over the phone, at a physical travel agency location, and so on. Customers might also be accessing these service providers at various points in time, before their vacation for research purposes, during their vacation for confirmation of a booking, or after their vacation to follow up on a payment mistake. And for service providers, their service lives in the context of other businesses. A resort hotel has really little control over how their information is displayed within a site like hotels.com. So the way that their customers perceive them is really dependent on how another service will set them up. So what our point here is that there's like this whole ecosystem that is the singular experience of going on vacation, but there's an ecosystem that it lives within. And how this experience pans out for both the customer and the provider really depends on how it's orchestrated. A well-designed service will link all of the touch points and channels together from end to end, ensuring that customers will still have a good experience despite interacting with your service in nonlinear and unpredictable ways. Everything is designed to communicate with one another across multiple channels and at different points in time. Service design actively integrates an ecosystem of channels and interactions to deliver a seamless and fulfilling experience to its users. It aligns all of the different components that might touch or impact the user experience, whether it's a physical touchpoint, a technology, or a piece of communication. So to do this, service designers often use a journey map to identify some of these components. And you're probably familiar with these maps. Maybe you've seen one or have even made one. Journey maps are a tool to help service designers combine storytelling and visualization so that businesses can better understand and address customer needs. They include the before, during, and after stages of how a customer interacts with a service across multiple touchpoints and channels. The service can either be its current or future ideal state. A current state journey map is really great at telling the holistic story of how somebody experiences a process or service today. It will emphasize exactly what's going on at a high point and what's going wrong at a pain point. And so all of this information comes together to surface areas of opportunity, which are moments that a business might leverage to positively impact their customer experience. And building a future state journey map helps to paint the picture of what an ideal customer service looks like. It provides the business with direction in identifying and prioritizing moments to design solutions for. And another piece of the service design puzzle is enabling the business and orchestrating internal work streams. So in order to effectively deliver a cohesive service, customers can't be the only ones that we design for. We also have to deeply consider the needs of service providers because they are the ones to deliver parts of the experience. They have to be supported and well-equipped to implement and maintain a seamless experience. And one way that we design for service providers is to use a service blueprint. The service blueprint is an operational tool that outlines both customer service interactions and the back-of-house processes that occur to deliver an experience. And you can think of back-of-house processes like those behind the scenes, like a behind-the-scenes setup. Similar to a restaurant, your front-of-house staff are the people that your customers interact with. So the servers, the bartenders, and the hostesses. Your back-of-house staff are those people who make your operations run. They're the cooks, they're the accountants, and it's the inventory control person. They're invisible to customers, but understanding this kind of setup will allow a service designer to plan out these resources, like people, processes, and artifacts that are necessary to make this experience successful. So now that you have a sense of what service design is and what some of its tools are, I'll hand it back over to Steph.
Great, thanks, Elsa. For this audience, we wanted to touch on how service design is different from UX or product design, as well as some of the overlap since they do have a lot in common. Both Elsa and I have roots in product or interaction design, and over the years, our practices have evolved into service design. To borrow a quote from Oliver King, the founder of a UK-based service design agency, Engine, one designs the interface and the experience, and the other designs the service and the organization behind it. Both service design and UX have design and design thinking at their core. They both use the foundational design process. They both use qualitative and quantitative research to uncover insights. They use prototyping and rely on making to help us think through ideas. They're both participatory in that they invite users to build and iterate on ideas, and the outputs of both practices don't exist in isolation. They're part of an ecosystem that users experience as a journey. Some of the key differences between UX and service design are their planes of existence and their scope. Service design is about orchestrating all of the people, the processes, and technologies required to deliver a service that customers will ultimately experience as being seamless. We help equip organizations to ensure that when customers interact with your business across multiple channels, customers will still have that seamless experience regardless of whether they're calling into a call center, looking you up online, or accessing in store. This means that service designers will often play the role of facilitator, helping to connect the dots between various people and touch points across an organization. On the other hand, UX and interaction design tend to play more within the digital space. Of course, this is not exclusive, though it tends to be a majority. Interaction designers tend to work with new technologies to develop touch points like apps and interfaces. UX designers often go deep into fully designing and implementing these touch points, whereas service designers would be designing the system and processes to support the touch point in relation to all of the others. To help us visualize some of these concepts, Service design is multi-channeled, while UX tends to focus on one or a handful of touchpoints at a time. Service design orchestrates people and processes across an organization to ensure that both the front of house and the back of house are working in harmony, to use Elsa's example of front of house at the front of a restaurant and back of house that customers aren't seeing. UX tends to focus more on the product and delivering the tangible thing that a customer would interact with. Last is service design may or may not include digital channels or touchpoints. Other parts of the business, like the call center, or even purely strategic parts of the business model, how your organization is structured, are in scope for service designers. Once again, I'm going to pass it back to Elsa.
So in this last part of the presentation, we want to touch on a project that Bridgeable worked on. And it was to redesign the experience of renewing your cell phone contract with TELUS. So at the end of 2013, TELUS approached us because the policies of cell phone contracts were about to change. The maximum length of a cell phone contract was going to be reduced from 3 years to just 2. This left TELUS with a large cohort of customers whose contracts were about to expire. And it's pretty well known out there that renewing your phone contract is a painful process, and most people coming out of it still feel like they've been ripped off by their provider. So to ensure that these customers would still be renewing with them, TELUS recognized that they would have to get the experience of contract renewals just right. Bridgeable recently won the Global Service Design Award for this project, beating out companies like Frog and IDEO, and we attribute the success a lot to our service design approach. So today we want to share a few key things with you that we felt really contributed to our success. The first was that upon kicking off the project, we spent a lot of time with our TELUS key stakeholders and service teams. We brought the executives and service teams together in one room so that everyone could collectively identify the contract renewal initiatives that were going on. This kind of business alignment is really important because it exposes that siloed view we talked about earlier. Bridgeable's goal at this stage was to get them working towards delivering a single seamless service experience. So it's imperative that different areas of the business were on the same page about how everyone fits into this broader system of delivering the renewals experience. And I'm sure you're all familiar with customer and user research. We used learning labs and interviews to ensure that the project vision and outcomes were always aligned to customer needs, motivations, and behaviors. During these sessions, we invited TELUS team members into the research so that they could see and hear firsthand what it was like to renew a contract with them. And taking all of that research data, we created a journey map to articulate and assess the experience of customers. And one of the major benefits of including TELUS stakeholders in our research sessions was that they were immediately able to recognize the nuances and the entirety of the customer experience. And this made the process of identifying priority areas for investment really easy. So once the team understood the key opportunities of focus, we facilitated a co-creation session. In this session, customers, TELUS team members, and other internal stakeholders collaborated directly with one another to come up with potential service concepts. And co-creations are really great because different groups of people can build on each other's ideas and fill in any missing gaps in knowledge or information. So this is particularly useful when we're dealing with complex experiences that span across multiple channels over time. And to test the possible solutions that came out of this co-creation, we used a prototype video to conceptualize a full service renewals experience. You'll see on screen some captures of this video. It showed how particular touchpoints, like interfaces of the experience, would look and feel, but also how some of those handoffs between parts of the business might work. This prototype went through multiple rounds of iteration so that we could make sure that we were never focused on a single channel or moment in the journey. Instead, we really wanted to show the entirety of how everything came together to work simultaneously across different channels and across different contexts of use. And finally, to support the TELUS teams who were providing the experience, we used a service blueprint to demonstrate how particular back-of-house tools and processes were necessary to come together to enable the smooth delivery of all of the complex front of house interactions of this redesigned renewals experience. The service blueprint provided a clear and compelling view of the target future state, allowing individual teams to see at a glance their role in delivering this seamless user experience. So it's been a year since this engagement with TELUS, which means we've had some time to collect data on the outcomes. The first was that customers were ranking the service consistently in the top 2 boxes of the likelihood to recommend scale, which is like an industry standard metric companies look at to evaluate customer satisfaction. And our prototyping really helped to increase online adoption by 400% over the course of just 3 months, which is really important for TELUS because renewing online is the most cost-effective way for customers to renew a plan. And this ties into our last point that each online transaction delivered $70 of OPEX savings or operational cost savings per customer versus renewing via telephone or in store. So in summary, taking a service design approach of bringing together parts of the organization, developing deep understanding of customer behaviors, pain points, and preferences, and co-creating with both staff and clients helped to lead this project to success. And I'll hand it over to Steph for the resources.
Great. So as we get towards our wrap up, this last slide contains some resources that we think are great if anyone is interested in learning more about service design. So an easy one to get started with is the Practical Service Design Slack group. It's similar to DesignX, but for topics related to service design. We've also got some books listed. The first one is This is Service Design Thinking, which is an overview of service design tools and methods, and it's got a sequel called This is Service Design Doing, which is about how to establish a customer-centric culture in your organization. Next, we have Service Design from Insight to Implementation. This is published by Rosenfeld. This speaks to higher level methods and provides some case studies. Last, we have Service Design for Business, which is about using service design to improve your customer experience. In terms of some online resources, you can check out Bridgeable's website and blog, where we will often post thoughts and case studies. There's also SDN Global, which stands for Service Design Network Global. Bridgeable's CEO, Chris Ferguson, heads up the Toronto chapter, and in the winter, we hosted our second annual Service Design Conference just at the end of December. When that conference first began the year prior, it was the very first service design conference in Canada. Last, there's practicalservicedesign.com, which is a great resource for tools, tips, and they also have a Slack group that you can check out. So that is enough from us. Now we'd love to hear some of your thoughts or see if you have any questions about service design. So Preet, do you want to jump in as our moderator?
Absolutely. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much. That was really insightful. And we did not plan the TELUS case study. It was so interesting. I was like, oh, the case study is on TELUS. So that was amazing. And I didn't know that you guys won the Global Service Design Award. That's amazing. Like it's amazing to know that we have like one of the top service design agencies right here, in Toronto, in our hub.
Yeah, and that award was actually accepted. The presentation was actually done with our CEO, Chris Ferguson, and Julie Mellett from TELUS. So one of the things that's been really nice is it's been such a strong partnership that often when we talk about that case study publicly, it's not just us as the consultants coming in, sharing what we did, but we often speak about it in partnership with the client on stage. Right.
That's amazing. That's really cool. And we've had a lot of questions. It's quite a lot of questions. We have about 20 minutes or so I'll try and cover as many as possible. But I think I'll start with a theme that has been recurring since, amongst quite a few of the questions, which has been more around, the career aspect of service design. So there is a lot of curiosity around how does one even go about exploring career opportunities in service design, and what kind of experiences or backgrounds do you need?
You want to talk about yours first?
Sure. That's a really interesting one. I would say that depending on the industry that you work in, so for example, looking at industries like healthcare or government, where by nature, they tend to be very focused on delivering services for large populations, you'll see a lot of pull from those industries as opposed to a push, where they're really trying to gain an understanding of service design. And so service design is definitely it's kind of a newer label for design in Canada, but it's one of the ones that I personally found really liberating, because again, as I started in healthcare, I found that as I was working on improving the customer experience, we were doing service design, but there wasn't that title for it. And so currently you can't necessarily go to university and get that certification around service design. Often people will approach it within their own context. So let's say you have a background in UX or in product design. It's very much about bringing that discipline forward, since you will still be working towards prototyping and delivering touch points and services in the world, but learning to step back and start doing some either self-education or reaching out to some groups, looking at case studies to start understanding how do you start building buy-in within your organization. So if anyone is interested and they look into some of those books, I believe I recall in the service design tools to implementation, I think in one of the intros in that book, one of the authors talks about how they used to work in the digital space, and they found that it was a barrier to implementation, not being able to access more of that back of house staff and understand more of the processes. And so I think that as a whole, a lot of design agencies are experiencing that kind of a pull for service design, where it's less kind of throw your design over the fence, and it's much more collaborative, where you need to be a partner within your organization more strategically to ensure that they can pull whatever your design is forward.
Right.
Yeah, and I might just add to that, because I know that there are a lot of people who are either just starting off in design within the community or are really interested in getting into service design. And I would just say that I think as a designer, there are a lot of skills that you already possess that you can bring into service design. So a lot of the times we start our projects off with user research. So just being able to do in-depth interviews, knowing those kinds of questions to ask so that you're getting the kinds of answers that you need from your users is already really helpful. For the UXers out there, being able to prototype, wireframe, and just being able to like make things with your hands and make things real for your client is really, really helpful. And to build on what Stephanie has already said, service design is really collaborative. So for me, when I was just starting off in this industry, the biggest gap was being able to collaborate with our clients in the same room and being able to use all of those design skills in front of another person and be able to get their buy-in on why this was useful to the process.
Mm-hmm. And just really quickly before the next question, to build on what Elsa was saying, I think if you want to be really tactical, if you are a practicing designer and you have a skill, as Elsa said, you already kind of have your foundation. I think that looking into building your competency around business and design strategy would be one of the things that would help you get into service design, since it's really that multifaceted lens where design is very well known for always taking that human-centered view, which tends to mean the end user to a lot of people. But human-centered means the end user and everyone that is required to deliver the product or service. So really tactically, if you want to start diving a bit into business and design strategy, that would be a good place to build upon your existing skill set.
Right. Awesome. Just before we move on from this, sorry, I think I'm doing myself. So just before we move on from the career aspect of the questions, there was one interesting question around someone mentioning Pinar. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but she said that in her experience, she's seen that service design roles have mostly been senior, but not a lot of like entry-level opportunities. Is that true, or is it because you do need people that have already been working in different backgrounds to kind of come in and yeah?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think that's definitely something that you might experience in various workplaces. But I think one great thing about service design is that, again, it's really collaborative, so that the way that our teams work is that we expect everyone, whether you're junior or senior, to be involved in the entire process from end to end, so that you have a really good view of, what your users have been saying and what the people who are delivering the service have been saying, so that you have all of the context that you need, so that if you did need to deliver a service blueprint or a journey map, you have that information with you, and you don't need to be going towards maybe like your manager or the senior executives for that kind of information. So I would say, no, it's not limited to just senior associates. It just really depends on, I think, the makeup of your team and how your projects are managed.
Right. So adding to that, and I think there was a question around so to what even fidelity of these solutions do you go in service design when you're looking at the overarching, end-to-end service? Is it just like saying okay, the app experience should be improved, or this is where the downfalls are, or actually then you're like, okay, now let's just zero in on the website, how people are renewing currently, and then you start mapping out flows for that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so part of what we do tends to operate at two levels. It operates at that higher level strategic view, and then it zooms into particular moments in time. So if you think about Bridgeable in particular is unique because what we do tends to be kind of a blend between what a management consultancy would do, which is that very high level business strategy, but then also being able to dive down and actually build something at the moment in time. And so when we kept referring to channels and touch points, that's really something that we can't emphasize enough, is that your strategy means nothing if you can't get down to actually engaging with people at a particular moment in time when they're interacting with your product or service. So depending on the nature of a product or of a project, we'll tend to do both. So let's say with the example of TELUS renewals, they would come to us and we would look at understanding that particular experience, but then we'd also try and understand kind of the broader ecosystem that it fits within. And so there's always a level of understanding both of those views. And then once you have that broader understanding of the view, that's when we would target in on some things that we like to call pivotal moments or pain points or areas of opportunity, where within the experience, once we've really established a kind of deep understanding of what it tends to look like from a customer's perspective and from the back of house, what it takes to deliver, then we would go in and design for that moment in time. So you do have to be able to think at both levels. Often our projects will start a little more high level with a lot of research and level setting, understanding the organization, understanding kind of the context, the world, and what customers experience. And then we kind of dive deep. And so there's always a little bit of zooming up and zooming down for sure.
Right. That's really interesting. It sounds, because I think a couple of people were already posting this question or sharing how sometimes the work can get too siloed when you're working at an agency or consultancy. So it's amazing. You get to see, you get best of both the worlds. That's amazing. We had early on, we had a question, when both of you were talking about the journey maps, and Jim had a really good question around, has it ever happened that, you had the future state journey map was made first? So actually, even taking a step back, do you
cut out.
Okay, I can repeat. So the question was around journey maps, and if right now the question specifically was, has it happened that a future state journey map was made first before the current state journey map? So do you do two journey maps, or is it in the same you overlay information? How does that work?
Sure. So the question is, would you ever make a future state journey map before making a current state journey map, just to clarify?
Yeah, almost like the ideal state, or do you map out how the current state is first, and then do you even map out the ideal state?
Yes, so we would definitely start with the ideal state first. Depending on the time horizon of your project, you generally want to make sure that you begin with a deep understanding of the way things are today, the way that customer behaviors are, their expectations. And then from there, often a journey map is a really complex tool that is kind of an output at the end of a broader synthesis where you're both understanding the complexity of a journey, and then you're also able to identify opportunities within it. And so part of what a future state journey map looks like, we kind of wouldn't be able to create that without first identifying what those opportunities are and should be. And so this is something that I think is really fundamental to all design disciplines, not just service design, but trying to make sure that you're solving the right problem. And that's a challenge unto itself. And it just requires a lot of exploration and level setting. And so from there, that's where you might build on top of an existing journey to show, okay, here's a bunch of gaps that we see. This is how we might want to fill those gaps in the future. And then depending on your time horizon, if it's starting to get, farther than 5 or 10 years, that's where you're probably going more into like future scenario planning and doing foresight work as opposed to the more day-to-day service design.
Right. That's really interesting. So as a follow-up, there was another question from Lauren around, like how do you decide when to use a user journey versus a service blueprint, and at what stages in the project are each of those the most effective?
Sure. I think that's a really great question, and it's like often the two tools that feel like they can be easily interchangeable. But I think for the most part, you would use a service blueprint to outline all of the back of house tools and processes that you need to deliver that front of house interaction. So a user journey map is really helpful when you're trying to give people a sense of either what's currently happening today in your service or your process, or what you want that service to look like sometime down the road. But it's when you're really designing for your back of house staff. So like maybe it's the receptionist or the people who are working at the call center that you want to be using your service blueprint to highlight, these are the artifacts that you need. These are the materials or the scripts that my receptionist needs in order to smoothly deliver that experience.
Right. That's really interesting. So again, as almost like building upon this, Raya asked a question that oftentimes when working in an agency, the work can get too siloed. So what is the actual process around implementing these blueprints and even the journey map? So do you continue to check in as throughout the project in the same way, to avoid just looking and just working on one artifact that you're working on?
That's a really good question. So I'd say that is going to really depend on the nature of your relationship with the client. And so that's one of the things that, for example, that TELUS project that we got to share is a great one because we've had that established relationship where it was really important for us to follow through. Otherwise, we would have been designing in a black box and not really knowing if any of those recommendations or service design changes that we made were actually valuable. And so that's something that I think is really important in a consulting environment to try and set up early on with your business development team and whoever's setting up your contracts, that you are able to either keep in touch. Obviously, for most consultancies, probably 95% of your work is never going to be public facing, which is totally fair. But you still want it to be really effective. And whether or not it's something that you want to be able to share publicly, it's really important to start trying to build that relationship with your clients so that you can have that ongoing feedback. And so for us, we often will have repeat engagements with clients because things in the past went really well. And I'd say that's something that has a lot more to do with just the way that you set up the expectations around your contracts with your clients, as opposed to necessarily kind of like the in the weeds design that you're doing once you're in the project.
Right. Yeah, that's really, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Elsa.
I'll add to that just to say that our CEO, Chris Ferguson, has a really great take on just like, there are some clients that are going to be ready to work with you in this very collaborative way where you have a very close-knit relationship. And some clients just like simply they're not ready, because when it comes to doing a service design project, there are really a lot of key dates that we need involvement from our clients. And if they're not involved in these either just like major decision-making moments or moments of alignment, if they're not present for those kinds of presentations or meetings, essentially we've already lost their buy-in and it's really difficult to move forward. So I would say that kind of relationship building and trust is just super important and imperative when you're trying to execute on a project like this.
Right.
Thanks for sharing. That's good.
Yeah.
Try and think of yourselves as partners to your clients as opposed to like the experts coming in to solve their problems. Yeah. You are an expert in your domain and your clients are experts in their domains, and you're coming together as a partnership to try and make something bigger. And the reason they're coming to you is because it's very complex and messy, and they've probably been working in it for years and years before your team ever got involved. And so really trying to think about it as more of a long-term partnership as opposed to kind of a specialist engagement.
Right. So even, so that's really interesting. And it sounds like a big part of the job, and correct me if I'm wrong, is around stakeholder management, like even for, like I'm assuming more than, a normal product designer in an agency environment. Is that the case that as a service designer, whether it be, working in an enterprise or the government or as a consulting, role, like how much of that part is stakeholder management? Because there are not as many like artifact-based decisions where you can be like, like I'm the designer, so I do know, what is the best way or, to build around these artifacts. But when it's service design, like, do you often see the case where the client can be a little like they know their business best, but of course you are coming in to diagnose, what's working, what's not working. So how much of a push and pull happens, and if it happens more than a regular job of a designer or product designer?
Yeah, I'd say that part of the way that at least our teams work at Bridgeable is they're all multidisciplinary. So we'll have designers of different backgrounds depending on the nature of projects. You might have, industrial designers or UX designers. There's often design researchers. We have a lot of folks with particular industry backgrounds, like we do a lot of work in healthcare. We have a lot of folks on staff that are business designers. And so that stakeholder engagement piece, you're absolutely correct. It is a lot of stakeholder engagement. And I'd say for myself coming in, if we're talking about your process of kind of moving into service design from another design discipline, if you're really used to kind of being heads down, thinking about designing that thing that your users are interacting with, there's a lot more kind of conversations, a lot more stakeholder management, a lot more level setting, and essentially strategy work than designing the artifact. But generally the best way to approach it is you would have a multidisciplinary team. So you will have folks that have a lot of that experience of managing client expectations and trying to set the project up. And so it's great here because within projects, you'll get to have visibility and some level of exposure or participation in all of those different components. But that I would say is definitely a bit of a mindset change. If you're looking at moving from, say, UX, where you're really heads down designing a product, into service design, there's a lot of moments where it might not even feel like design at first.
Right.
Because it's like, well, there's so much talking here. There's a lot of PowerPoint presentations. There's a lot of strategy. But the reason that stuff is important is, as you saw, we talked a lot about touch points. You can provide this really well thought through, beautiful, well-polished touch point. But if ultimately your client's organization isn't able to support it and see it through, then it's not going to go anywhere. And so it's kind of like making sure that the work that you do gets that follow through, and absolutely facilitation and stakeholder engagement are number one skill sets working in service design.
Right. That's amazing. And it's funny, you talked about like how sometimes it feels like you're not even designing. And at one of my previous jobs, like I was put on a project where it was like for 2 months, I think I didn't open Sketch at all, but I was like doing a lot of competitive research and, a lot of like stakeholder management or presentations and just like strategy stuff. And I did not know it was like more of a service design project until I walked up to my director and I was like, do you not like my design skills? Like, why am I not designing? And then I was like, no, actually, like this project is like, the end results we are trying to get at are much different. But yeah, that's, and it's definitely sounds like it is quite I wouldn't say like a growing field, but it's more like of a, realization that many companies are having, that's another level of design that's becoming more and more important, and companies need to look at. So yeah, that sounds amazing. Before we close the webinar, are you guys hiring any designers? Because there seems to be a lot of interest from people looking to how to enter service design.
We're constantly hiring, so keep an eye on the website. Yeah.
Okay.
Constantly.
Awesome. So yeah, so for those of you who are looking for a job or how to get into service design, keep an eye out for Bridgeable's website and the careers page. We also have a DesignX. So apart from quite a few resources that Stephanie and Elsa shared, and quite a few people shared in the general chat forum as well, feel free to use. There's a service design channel in DesignX that actually I started because I was curious and I wanted people to talk about service design. So we started, and there are quite a few people there. So feel free to carry on these conversations and carry forward the questions if some of them were not answered today. And we have quite a few folks from Bridgeable on the DesignX Slack group, so I'm sure there will be quite a few people to help you with those questions. So yeah. So once again, a big thank you, Stephanie and Elsa, for sharing what service design is all about this afternoon. And if there is a lot of interest from the community for part 2 or getting into more details, we might bug you again.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yep, that sounds great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure. And thank you for everyone tuning in. Those were some really great targeted questions. I know we had no idea what people were going to ask because it's such a broad audience, but I think those were the right things to ask, essentially. So thanks again for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Bye.